And there's a lot of people who like don't listen to the Bankless podcast that have very strong opinions about Bankless. They have an opinion on Bankless from like the tweets that they read or the tweets about Bankless that other people that Mert tweeted out, and is like creating some like extremely warped version of reality.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast, where we ask your favorite builders the questions you wish you could ask yourself. This is a production of neonewstoday.com, and I'm your host, Dylan Grabowski. In this episode, we were joined by David Hoffman, the co-host of Bankless and general partner of Bankless VC. I just want to give a shout out to David for joining the pod, which was a result of a back and forth that we had on X, Twitter, about the incentives and conflicts of interest of running both a VC firm and a large media entity in the crypto space. In this conversation, we discussed how David's thesis has changed during his tenure working in blockchain, the 3 criteria for podcast content that David and his co-host Ryan choose to discuss, why Bankless is a for-profit entity, the duo's passion for Ethereum, lessons learned from controversial moments over the years, and so much more. Just a reminder, nothing said on this podcast is a solicitation to buy or sell any tokens, and that the host or guests may hold tokens discussed in any given episode. You can check out a disclaimer on www.neonewstoday.com. If you enjoyed this episode, please rate and review it on your favorite podcasting platform and share with friends and family. Every rating, review, like, and comment helps us reach more people and bring you more of your favorite guests. With all that said, I really enjoyed this conversation with David, and I hope you enjoy it too. Hey everyone, welcome to the Smart Economy Podcast. Today we're joined by David Hoffman, the co-host for Bankless, the general partner for Bankless VC, and the life bringer to Bankless DAO. How you doing today, David?
Really good. Thanks for bringing me on, Dylan. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, I think like before we even start everything, I just want to give a shout out to you. This conversation came from a little bit of back and forth where I was just saying, I don't like this that Bankless did. And you took the time to respond to me. And I think over the years, you guys have caught a lot of flack. So I really just wanted to open this opportunity to have a longer form conversation about what it's like to be a media personality on crypto Twitter and to just like have a catch-all for the things that have been brought up over the years and for you to just say, this was our reasoning, this was the logic. There's no malicious intent behind this.
Yeah. I think there is this general like frustration or feelings about like Bankless's arc, whereas like it started one way and it has ended up a different way. And that different way is not what people like wanted or expected. And then like me and Ryan, when we see those reactions, we get like a little confused because it felt very like natural to us and normal to us. And like we are inside of it, right? Like we're inside of this little structure that we have created. And so we're also not seeing it from the outside. And I think there's a gap there about like our understanding of Bankless and like the average person's understanding of Bankless. And like maybe it's a comms gap. It's like maybe it's a branding gap. There's some gap there, and I don't know how it got created, but yeah, sure, I'm very happy to like go into this and try and explore that.
Awesome. I think we'll open the doors to clear up a lot of misconceptions. Just in the response that you provided to me, a lot of connections were made that I just didn't see before. And I'm a guy that makes content and podcasts in this space, so if it was easy for me to miss, it has to be even easier for people on crypto Twitter to miss.
I think it's the default case that people have, like, we just haven't elevated some aspects of Bankless.
And I think just in general, like being in the crypto space, we're taught to be naturally adversarial. So it might not even be people's fault. This is just the footing that they step on and or they start from and where they go. But before we kind of like dig into everything, one of my favorite questions about having guests on this pod is just to hear folks kind of like genesis moment. So I think like if people dig through, they can find the genesis of why you started Bankless, but really like what was the first time you heard Bitcoin or Ethereum? And if you're like me, you probably glazed over it and then had an aha moment later. So What was just kind of like the first time you heard about any of these digital assets? And then what was your aha moment?
My first exposure to Bitcoin was this website StumbleUpon, where you would just like click StumbleUpon and you would get a new website, and you could like have it cater different interests to you. And so I was interested in like tech and philosophy and computers and games and stuff like that. And so I just stumbled upon the Bitcoin white paper and I read it and I was like, I don't get it. And then I just kept on StumbleUponing, and every once in a while I was just like, oh yeah, here's the Bitcoin white paper again. I have stumbled upon it once again for like the 7th time. I still don't get it. There's this thing called mining, like whatever. And that was my first exposure to it. So I knew Bitcoin was this weird internet currency thing with these weird dynamics that like with mining, and I didn't really get it. So that was my first exposure to it. Never even thought about buying it or anything. And then it was in like December of 2016 when Bitcoin crossed like $1,000 for the first time. And I download Coinbase, and there's just Bitcoin, Ether, and Litecoin. And that's my first exposure to Ether. And I'm like, okay, I understand Bitcoin. I saw Litecoin too. Ether, no clue what that is. And then I did nothing. Once again, just did nothing. Didn't do anything. And then it was in the middle of 2017 when these gaming subreddits are all complaining about high GPU prices. And I'm like, what's going on with this? I have a GPU. Like, who are these miners that are jacking up GPU prices? What are they mining? And then I realized that I go through this process of setting up NiceHash, and I'm mining Ether and getting paid like $5 a day. I'm like, oh, this is kind of sick. And I'm like on my way to physical therapy school. I'm broke, so I need passive income. And I'm like, oh, okay, let's see if I can scale this up. And so I end up building, like using all my money, selling all of my entire Robinhood portfolio, which was NVIDIA and AMD. And if I had held that, actually, it would have been great, but I didn't, because I sold it all for mining computers. And I built 4 mining computers, put them into different corners of my dad's house from like July of 2017 to August of 2017, where I got those things set up. And then I was like invested in it. And then I was like, okay, I'm mining like $40 a day. That's pretty sick. What is it that I am mining? Like, what is this Ethereum thing? It's pretty cool that I'm like processing and validating transactions in my own home. I have a bit of the financial system inside my home. That's kind of cool. I can now understand the metaphor of like, oh, this is inside out Wall Street. Like I am a stakeholder in Wall Street rather than Wall Street being closed off to me. I really understood that conceptually without really knowing too much about how blockchain works. Meanwhile, like I'm also trying to get into physical therapy school. And so like I'm trying to study for the GRE, and my level of effort for the GRE is up here, and then my level of interest in crypto is down here, and it just slowly just inverts. And my time is spent like trying to get into physical therapy school drops to 0, and I get myself out to ETH Denver 2018, when I'm at the hackathon. I'm supposed to be there for 2 days, and on the 3rd day I'll go up to Boulder and tour the physical therapy school. And then Sunday came, and I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna stay at ETH Denver. And that was the moment for me. I was like, okay, I'm clearly not applying myself to physical therapy school. I'm instead going to do this Ethereum thing. And like at ETH Denver, I had written out and printed out like 20 pounds of paper from 3 different articles that I had written. And I had to staple them together, and I was handing out like written articles. I was like, hey, please read my article. Hey, like, please read my article. And that's like how some of the first people I met in crypto like remember me, is because like I handed them like a physical article of just like, here are some thoughts that I have about like crypto. They're very philosophical, high level. This was like meaningful to me. Please read this. And that was my genesis into crypto. And that's when I like started to learn to like be a content producer. And so started writing on my Medium. Grew a following that way. Ryan, my co-host, started reading my written stuff. I also had a podcast that I did with my college friend called POV Crypto. He was a Bitcoiner. I was the Ethereum guy. We just yelled at each other for 60 minutes. That grew into like this bear market darling podcast throughout 2018 through 2020. And then Ryan and I started the Bankless podcast in early 2020. And he had started the Bankless newsletter, and I was starting to write for the Bankless newsletter. And then in September of 2020, after doing the podcast for 6 months, we were like, okay, let's put a ring on this. This is working out. Let's make this a company. And we made Bankless LLC in September of 2020.
That's awesome. I think also that's a nugget of gold that I hadn't heard before. I just moved back to Denver from the Bay Area for ETH Denver 1. So I unfortunately missed the 2018 event, but I do miss those days in the Sport Castle.
Yeah, the Sport Castle was great, man. I love the Sport Castle.
Yeah, that's also where I caught COVID for the first time at ETH Denver 2020. So.
Oh, really? Oh, wow. That was the first one. Yeah. Uh-huh.
Yeah. Shout out. That was my first physical POAP, actually. So yeah, that's a super fascinating arc. I think it's a fantastic overlap that you were in Denver for Eat Denver and decided to bail on going to check out the physical therapy school up in Boulder. So like you're chatting with RSA, you're having this podcast where you're going back and forth with like a Bitcoin guy and you're representing the Ethereum stance. What was it that was like, all right, let's do the Bankless podcast? Because clearly you got your feet dirty in learning how to mine. You started creating content, started building a Medium following. What was it that said to you and RSA, like, we need to jump into creating a podcast? We have a voice that no one's heard. And like, what was the thing that you wanted to start sharing with people?
Yeah. I think it was a bunch of different ingredients. Ryan was listening to my podcast, I'm assuming pretty religiously. I was writing, in my opinion, banger articles about Ethereum. Like I was putting a ton of work into them. So I was writing like one article a month, and they were long and they were like deep, and I like really cut my teeth like writing these long pieces. And like back in the day, like there was almost no content producers about Ethereum. Like Anthony Cesano hadn't even made the Daily Gwei yet. I was one of the few people writing anything, and like it was me and Ryan. And so we were the only like content producers. And then the Pump podcast was defining the time in 2018 through 2020. Like it was the Pump podcast, and then there was like a long tail Bitcoin podcast, but Pump was really killing it. And so I think Ryan knew that like, writing, because Ryan had started the Bankless newsletter in 2019, and he was writing every single article 5 days a week. And so he was just brute forcing that, just like, I can't imagine how stressful that is. Like every single day. It's a paid article. It's a paid newsletter. So the first 4 were free, but then the 5th release on Friday was paid, and he just had to ship that. And I think he very quickly learned that like that doesn't scale. And so he learned to have like guest posts. He grew up a following, and then once his following is big enough, he could like leverage that following to like, hey, somebody else, you're an authority on this one subject, please write for me. And so he learned to like kind of scale out that. But then I was in his DMs being like, you are like missing the whole podcast vertical. It's way better for distribution. It's way more fun. It's way more scalable. I think you should start the Bankless podcast. And he was like, no, that's a bad idea. And I'm like, you're wrong, bro. And so finally, I think I just said like, okay, we will start the Bankless podcast. It'll be us. I'll edit it because I can edit podcasts. I know how to do that. I know you don't know how to do that. I can do that. And then we will start the Bankless podcast. And that was what tipped him over, is like, okay, I can do this. And Ryan has a very high standard. He's like, he's not going to do something half-assed. Like he has to turn it into a 10 out of 10 product, or he's not going to do it. And so I think with the two of us and understanding that like podcasting is a superior distribution technology, he was convinced to do the podcast.
Yeah, I think a little bit later, I would love to touch into like just the costs that are associated with putting out a high quality production, because a lot of people just consume this content for free, but don't realize that there's a lot that goes into equipment, that goes into post-production, that goes into distribution. So hopefully we can touch on that later. And maybe we can kind of like start delving into the content subject matter a little bit, but I also want to give you an opportunity to like paint a picture for a question that will eventually come up. So how have your theses changed a little bit since you entered the space? You started out, you and RSA were super pro Ethereum, and you were espousing the virtues of the Ethereum ecosystem. And in the years since, as you responded to me in your written letter, that the L1 ecosystem has just exploded and grown beyond Ethereum. So maybe we can use this as an opportunity for you to share how your theses might have changed a little bit from when you started Bankless to where we're at today.
Yeah. There's like a lot of those like early articles that I wrote about early on were all theses, right? Like there was the Money Legos piece, there was Protocol Sync thesis, which basically states that like the more credibly neutral and decentralized a protocol is, the more scalable it is, more things can be built on top of it. And so there's a bunch of like early thesis, triple point asset thesis. I think all of these are like, they're still like valid, but I think the thing that's changed in my mind about them is that the strength of them feels weaker today, especially as crypto has gotten more real. They were very useful like mental models, like anchors of understanding back in the day. And then as crypto has gotten from like literally just our imaginations, because like that's what crypto was in 2018. The 2018 through 2019 era, before DeFi really like set foot, like it was just pure imagination. There was nothing on Ethereum to do. Like MakerDAO came in like 2018. And that was the only thing. And MakerDAO was a niche inside of Ethereum, which was a niche inside of crypto. Like Ethereum in 2018 was just like as big a deal as like any other like alt blockchain. So like it wasn't obvious. It was not non-obvious. And so these theses were like really good anchors for like understanding how things will unfold. And then like they kind of like they were pretty useful for a while, but now I think like the rules of the meta are different now that like the protocol sync thesis I think is just less applicable and less useful as a tool. And so like I still think they're generally correct, but like being able to apply them and leverage them as an investor I think is less. Other metas have taken over, have been more salient. And so there's like other ideas out there that I think are just more like Kobe Wright wrote that article about like investing in the changing metas. And I think that's just like way more useful of a mental model to understand. And it's less about the architecture of things. It's more about trading in crypto, which is, I'm just not good at that, nor am I interested in it. And so like the things that I have been interested in and like inspired by and passionate about in crypto seem to be like kind of in the rear view mirror as in terms of just like what other people care about in crypto. And so like that's something that I have like personally had to come to terms with is like the things that I care about and find interesting in only scale so far to like the rest of the crypto industry. And so that's how I would say like my ideas have adapted. It's like, well, like some of the ideas I think are cool are like actually just more interesting to just like me and Ryan more than they are like broadly crypto.
Yeah. And so speaking of that, how do you kind of like keep your finger on the pulse for what's going on? Obviously, when you and Ryan started, it was just you two working on this, but you've also scaled to grow the Bankless team. So maybe this is like a two-part question. A, how big is the Bankless team and what are their focuses? And B, how do you keep your finger on the pulse for what's happening these days?
Yeah, I mean, the easy and obvious answer is just Twitter. Because they're like, keeping your finger on the pulse is just talking to people and listening to people, and that's Twitter is just where that's happening. And so there are like my select sources of who I think are signal, and I will attune to them better. Like if I want to know about what's going on in Ethereum, I just go listen to Anthony Susano or Tim Bako or something like that. And so like I have different like experts that are relevant for certain sectors. Like Ijaz, my AI roll-up co-host, if something's going on in AI crypto, I'm going to go talk to him. But then also inside of the Bankless Discord, we have like this like pulse category. And so there is AI Pulse, AI Agent Pulse, On-Chain Pulse, Markets Pulse, Crypto Pulse. And this is we just throw news and links and tweets in there as a team. And then we just organize these by these different sectors. And so then like each one is just kind of, so it's useful to having more eyeballs on different sectors. And like if anyone is listening to this and they're not in a group chat who's doing the same thing, like you're slow. You're too slow. Like you need multiple eyeballs all kind of like focusing on different metas, and you need to be a part of that system. So to answer your question about the Bankless team, we have like 3 people on the podcast team. So 3 podcast editors who all wear multiple hats. So they're also scheduling managers. They also help produce the agendas. So it's like a kind of a full scope podcast team. 3 people on the podcast team, 3 people on the newsletter team, a newsletter editor. We have 3 people on the website team, so like a chief engineer, and then another engineer, and then a head of product. There's 2 ops queens, Rachel and Caitlin, a handful of contractors, but it comes out to about like 18 people on the media side of things, and then on the venture side of things, 3 GPs, and then 2 investment associates, and then an occasional intern.
Well, shout out to you for responding to a DM and scheduling this yourself without going through your scheduling manager. Props. Cool. So to jump into kind of like why we were here, I just want to once again say thank you for coming into the Lion's Den. Someone called you out, you responded, and I think you had very fair responses. So maybe we can just kind of like start from the shift that you and your team have made. I think a lot of misconceptions that crypto Twitter might have about Bankless is that you guys are the Ethereum shills. And one of the things that first kind of like gave me wonder was when I started seeing advertisements and articles and content outside the Ethereum ecosystem. So I thought these were like the Ethereum maxis, and now they're talking to me about Solana. They're talking to me about Say. they're propagating all these L2s, and I don't know if I agree with the L2 rollup thesis or not. So I just started having a lot of opportunities to like internally shift what I thought you guys were, which was Ethereum maxis. So maybe we can just like take a moment to address Bankless being viewed as Ethereum maxis, and maybe just like address like what the realism is for what Bankless is and what you guys are trying to do.
Yeah, and I guess that answer is also kind of a moving target. Like the Bankless podcast is mine and Ryan's podcast, and so we are the editorial decision makers as to like what goes on the podcast. And so what goes on the podcast is it's kind of like a three-way optimization function between what we are interested in, what our listeners want to hear about, and what we think is good for the world. So like one is like public goods. One is just like our intrinsic interests, because good content comes from co-hosts that are intrinsically interested in about the subject. And then since we are a business, we need to make sure that we're actually making content that actually people want to consume, because we're a business. Like, at some point you have to actually pay the bills. So you have to optimize for views. So optimize for what we want to contribute to the world, optimize for views, optimize for what we think is intrinsically interesting. So it's a multivariate like combination between those three things. But that's also just the podcast. And I think some people maybe look at the Bankless like content sphere and maybe get confused because it seems like a little bit schizophrenic. Because like David and Ryan on the podcast are like Ethereum bulls, but then if you go look at the Bankless newsletter, it's like a different voice, and that's because we're not writing the newsletter anymore. We're doing the podcast. We have like a bench of writers who write with some like level of mandate, like some optimization function that's similar to that. But like the writers are writing about what they think is intrinsically interesting, and like me and Ryan are never going to tell them like, yo, you write about Ethereum. That's your job. Like we're never going to tell them that. We tell them like that there's some optimization function of like, hey, like make sure you write what people want to read. Like optimize for what people want to read, because we're a newsletter, we're a website. We want traffic. That's the business. But also write about what you think is intrinsically interesting, because those two things have synergies together. And so when we hire someone, like I don't know if you've noticed, but the younger people in crypto care less about Ethereum, and they tend to like the shinier, newer things. They like the Zoomers of crypto, the younger millennials of crypto really liked Solana back when it was just Solana versus Ethereum. And now Zoomers just don't really care about Ethereum uniquely at all. They think of it as just like, they don't think of Ethereum as special in the way that Ethereum people think Ethereum is special. I think Ethereum is special, but I'm also not going to like tell my writers what they can and cannot say. Like I want them to optimize for what they think is intrinsically interesting, because that's how I learned to be a content producer. That's how I got to be where I am, as I just wrote about the things that I find intrinsically interesting. And part of like scaling the business is like, yo, you got to let some parts go. Like we don't want to be like totally like dogmatic about what our writers are writing about anyways. And so we have a newsletter editor. He manages the writers, and they write what they think is interesting, and they write about what the market wants to hear and what they think is cool. And that kind of leads to if you go to bankless.com, that will lead into the articles about the relevant subject spheres that people find interesting. And I think some people in Ethereum were like frustrated about that. Like, why is Bankless writing this article about like the top 10 opportunities on Solana? Well, the answer as to why Bankless is writing about the top 10 opportunities on Solana is because, well, one of our writers is interested in it, and that's what the market wants. Like, that's what the people want to hear. And I am not, like, maybe I am not going to do a podcast on that because I'm not intrinsically interested in that subject, but I'm not going to tell one of my employees to not do that, because it's what he wants, it's what they want, and it's what the market wants. And it's actually Ethereum's problem that is what the market wants. It's not my problem. That is Ethereum's problem. But I think that gets at the gap between, like, okay, well, Bankless was quite literally an Ethereum only podcast for a very long time. And then when me and Ryan were writing the newsletter, and in the early days, not only were we only writing about Ethereum, but almost Ethereum was the only thing to write about. And so there was this like perceived exclusivity that we had to the Ethereum ecosystem. But then like Solana brought this thing like parallelism to the table, and that captured mindshare. And there's no way to talk about parallelism without talking about Solana. And I'm trying to educate myself as an investor in crypto. So I'm not going to like stick my head in the sand and become naive to the ideas of parallelism just because it doesn't happen inside of the Ethereum ecosystem. One of the things that really impacted me with my like growing up in crypto was like learning about how Bitcoin maximalists treated us Ethereum people, and wanting to not at all repeat those same mistakes, because that dug Bitcoin maximalism into a hole. Like they just made up complete fail, like just lies about like Ethereum node requirements. It was complete lies, and it was like it is intentionally dishonest. And there's no way I don't have that gene in my body to like have that same desire to play that same game against someone like Solana. I think that like Ethereum is like Bankless we get branded as like sometimes nuns that like wrap people's fingernails. I think Ethereum is morally superior to Solana as a technical architecture, but that does not stop me from like appreciating technical breakthroughs that Solana has brought to the world. And it would make me a worse investor if I did not understand that. And then it would also, like, our audience isn't as Ethereum maximalist as we are. Like, they also want to learn about parallelism or like the trade-off space of IBRL. And so in addition to all the things I said, I also want to be a good investor in crypto, and that means being open to alternatives. And so as like, you can probably like look at the Ethereum dominance percentage, and when it was 44%, people thought Bankless were ETH maxis. And now when it's like 7%, like we are actually like very well distributed, because where are the topics of conversation coming from? It's coming from a much wider distribution that's outside of the Ethereum Loki, and that has followed along with the decline of Ethereum dominance in the crypto space.
So that was one of the things that actually forced me to check my previous assumptions about the Bankless team, was realizing that you guys have just grown into a business and you employ up to 18 people now. And when you just like spelled it out that we want our writers creating content that drives them, I, as a content creator, want to create content about things that I find interesting. And so when you're saying that the people you employ, you're empowering them to write about what they want, how could I reasonably get upset about that when if I had an employer, that is exactly what I would want them to be doing for me? So
yeah, I think people think that like me and Ryan write every single article that comes out of like bankless.com, which is just, there's too much time. I don't have that much time. I barely have enough time to do like 4 podcasts a week. But there's 5 articles that come out of Bankless every single day. Like that's a completely new like set of individuals.
Yeah. So I think another thing that really helped kind of expand the way I should view Bankless is, and maybe I'll take a step back. The way that this podcast is funded is we are a validator node on the Neo ecosystem, and we funnel portions of our proceeds for being a validator node into supporting the podcast, because ultimately we believe that while this is a protocol agnostic pod, I can use my examples working in the Neo ecosystem to kind of market Neo just by relating to the way that others are building, using the way that I've been learning about blockchain, which is working in Neo since 2018. So we have a different funding model. We have a constant stream of income that's coming from a source, from a network that we validate. When you mentioned that Bankless has started from day one being a for-profit company, there are inherently things that I just don't understand, because that's not the way that we try to expand or grow the audience for the Smart Economy podcast. So can you also maybe take a moment to walk us through why Bankless focused on being for-profit, and what are some of the pros and cons of having the freedom of being for-profit? What are the opportunities that it opens you up to, but what are the constraints in terms of feedback you might have heard from people over the years?
Yeah. I mean, the majority of the answer is like, why did you guys choose to make a for-profit business? Is any answer that you would expect is like, well, I want to like make money and have a job. Like, I need to do something with my life that pays the bills. Like, why does anyone start a business? Like, we started Bankless as a business because for any of the same reasons that somebody would start a business in the first place. But like, ignoring that, like, we were the first media entity in Ethereum when we started in 2019, 2020, I think we were actually the first media entity in Ethereum, period. Like, there was like CoinDesk and Decrypt and Cointelegraph, but none of them were really in Ethereum. And when we started, like, it was probably like 18 months of time before we did like a non-Ethereum episode. So like the understanding that Ethereum was like ETH maxi is like totally justified because like for 18 months we just only talked about Ethereum. One part because it was intrinsically interesting to us, and another part was like that was literally all there was to talk about. And like there we could have talked about Bitcoin, but there was already like 30,000 Bitcoin podcasts out there, so we didn't need to cover it. Why do a for-profit business in the context of Ethereum was that there was just this incredible and you're actually seeing this angst in Ethereum again today, and there was this incredible angst throughout 2019 through 2020 that education and branding and awareness about Ethereum was dog shit, and it always has been dog shit. And like one of the reasons was that because like there was all of this like, and this persists again to this day in the Ethereum culture, there's this big kumbaya about like Ethereum education. And like, oh yeah, let's just like run a grant about making some educational video. Like it doesn't work. It doesn't scale. And you need a for-profit business with for-profit incentives to scale their education and distribution and awareness of the things that they are talking about. So we started Bankless to be a business. I quit my job as like a COO of a tokenized real estate startup. I quit my job to start Bankless. I needed to pay money. Need to get money. But then on top of that, like it was also to actually do the thing that the Ethereum community had been like complaining about for over a year about. If you go onto YouTube and you type in crypto, you get Data Dash, this old crypto YouTuber doing YouTube charts. And he's also, fun fact, I don't think he exists anymore, was funded by like, he would just receive a token, he would do an episode about the token, and he would sell the token. BitBoy style. So like the Ethereum was like on one side of things, we have this amazing platform built by Vitalik. It's so incredible. It's going to change the world. And you go onto YouTube and you find BitBoy. So like that's Ethereum problem. We need somebody to go toe to toe with that. And so Ryan and I did that. No one else was doing that. Ryan and I stepped up and we made this for-profit business that would scale, and then we could hire a team. Like I'm like, you should see some of the dog shit thumbnails that I made in 2020 when we started the podcast. Now we have, because we are successful, we have a very expensive graphic designer who makes incredible thumbnails. And that goes to toe optimizing the click-through rate of our videos to make sure that if you type in crypto, that we come ahead of BitBoy or whoever the new like YouTuber is of the time. And that's what it takes. You need to have a for-profit model to go toe-to-toe to elevate Ethereum to be where it ought to be. And that's what we did. And we did that for 18 months. And then we started to like, okay, well, like something else in crypto is like interesting to me, and it happens to not be Ethereum. And so now we've built up this structure and this competency at elevating our content and distributing our content. And then we started to point it elsewhere. We first pointed it to like AI with Eliezer Yudkowsky. But then we started to do like non-Ethereum episodes. And now the Ethereum community is like, yo, whoa. Like you guys built up this incredible distribution platform. Now you're talking about like Solana, like what gives? And we're like, oh, we don't know. We're just like talking about the thing that all of crypto Twitter is talking about first off. And it's interesting to us too. And so I think there was some like disappointment in the Ethereum community. It's like, yo, like we supported you guys. We helped elevate you guys. And now you guys are just like 180 on us. And we're like, I didn't feel like it was a 180. I just felt like I was doing my job. And there's always like a trade-off of like, if you don't give the broader listener base what they want, then they're going to go elsewhere. And so like my response to the Ethereum community when we are critiqued with like abandoning Ethereum is like, well, the two Bankless co-hosts have their biggest bags in ETH, and it's the second, there is no second to us. There is no second place to ETH to us in our bags. And so we're going to go bring Anatoly onto the podcast, and we're going to get a listener base that we otherwise wouldn't have because we are known as this like ETH maxi podcast. And some percentage of that new listener base is going to like the podcast, and they're going to subscribe, and they're going to stick around, and they're going to become listeners. And then if for every episode that they continue to listen to, they are listening to two people with a huge bag of ETH. And that is the compromise. That's the sacrifice that we have to make in order to grow the brand, in order to like bring back people down to the very bottom of the Bankless funnel, which is like listening to the Bankless podcast co-hosts whatever they talk about. That's the hard choices that a for-profit business would make, that a non-profit, God bless him, Anthony Sazzano, volunteer-based content production like organization doesn't have to think about, because like Anthony Sazzano literally only makes content about Ethereum. No one in Solana is going to listen to Anthony Sazzano, but somebody in Solana is going to come listen to Bankless. And then we are pulling people in closer towards Ethereum because Ethereum is what we believe in. and Ethereum is the investments that we are positioned in. And yes, we are doing other things that are not Ethereum content, but it's the right ROI strategy. It's the right EV strategy for Ethereum for us to go and do non-Ethereum episodes to bring people into the Ethereum sphere. Like, that's how I would position it.
Yeah, I 100% empathize with the spend most of your time caring about one ecosystem, be largely exposed to a particular ecosystem, but create content for your content media distribution platforms in a protocol agnostic way. I mean, that is exactly what this podcast is, actually. So I think you brought up a really kind of like sad model that we see today. If a large scale entity, go read Zach XBT to see who some of these players are, to get called out for receiving token allocations and then dumping immediately after they talk about the token, insert X token here, on their media distribution platform. You can kind of see the nasty side of the pay-to-play model. Without necessarily like delving into specific details or sharing your exact secret sauce, what does the general sponsorship method for Bankless Media look like?
Yeah, it looks like any other podcast with advertisers. We have different like offerings. So you can sponsor us for a quarter at a particular rate. You can sponsor us for a year. We have CPMs, so cost per million, which is just like how much do we charge you for like 1 million impressions? And then you pay us that money, and then you agree to that for a quarter or 2 quarters or a year. There's like different kind of form factors. So you have like the regular like pre-recorded ads, which are like those are like the Bankless sponsor ads. Then we do like this one unique ad, which we call the Blitz, which is more of a shorter term thing. That's the only like live ad read that I read out on the podcast. And that one rotates a little bit faster. It's a little bit more for like product releases or more short-term announcements, like a conference. It started off when CoinDesk reached out to us and say, "Hey, we want to advertise CoinDesk consensus on Bankless, and it happens in 3 weeks." And we're like, "Well, usually we go by quarters, so we can't really fit you in. But I guess we could do this one custom package where we just read out your script for the 2 weeks leading up to the conference." And then that's how we made the Blitz. We call that the Blitz. And so that's sponsoring the Bankless podcast. And then you can sponsor the Bankless newsletter, and you get a little graphic on the website and inside of the articles, and it's just like a basic traffic-based business. And so we show our sponsors how much traffic that we get and what their expected like traffic conversions would be, and then we give them a number, and then they pay that.
Speaking of conferences, you guys co-hosted Permissionless. By the way, congrats on your fight. I was there.
Thank you. Oh yeah.
Watched you beat Jane. Yeah, shared some nice clips too. I got some good images of you landing some blows. So what are kind of like what's the outlook for future conferences that Bankless looks to kind of like co-produce? Are you guys going to do Permissionless 4? Do you have other conferences on the radar?
So Permissionless 4 is happening in June, June 22nd to 24th, I think, in Brooklyn, which is really great because that's where I live. We're actually not partnering with Blockworks this year. We're letting them do it on their own this year. And that's just because, I don't know if you noticed, but like Ryan's been on sabbatical for 3 months. Just like the crypto industry is kind of like bad vibes. And it's like it's not really any particular reason. Like there's no like fallout between Bankless and Blockworks. I love those guys. Mike and Jason are my friends. We just decided to just not do it this year just for a workload reason, especially when like there's a 2-person podcast with only 1 person right now. Ryan will come back in like a month or so. So we just opted out for doing it this year. So maybe we'll do it next year. We'll see. We'll kind of take it year by year. But then we also have started the Bankless Summit. So this is like a kind of a 1-day side event, TED Talks for Ethereum side event that we do, that we did the first one at DevCon in Bangkok, and then we'll do the second one in Buenos Aires for Dev Connect, and just 1 day of talks. And like the position that we give is like, there's no panels. If you ever go to a crypto conference, it's just like 7-person panels, and they're all terrible. And so my rule is that there are no panels. There are speakers who are giving talks or presentations or something, and that's all that there are. And it's a way better form factor. It's way more like listener friendly rather than like having this like kind of brand affiliation side event thing. And so the second Bankless Summit will be in Dev Connect in Buenos Aires.
Cool. And so that's also something that I've always kind of gained value out of Bankless, was just that it is indeed, a high quality source of educational content. So to kind of like dig into another misconception of mine that you helped kind of open my eyes to and really paint a better picture for. I sort of, over the years working in the Neo ecosystem, I've had a lot of opportunities to get entrance into ICOs, into early token allocations, into pre-sales. I've even had projects just want to give me tokens and NFTs just as a token of appreciation. And one of the things we've always done is just said no, because it really helps us just maintain that there's no conflict of interest. So this is probably my bias coming into the Bankless episodes. But one of the things that really like turned my heels around was when I realized that there's a Bankless VC arm and then there's a Bankless media arm. And you did a fantastic job of kind of differentiating between the two and also kind of like showing that you have to earn your chops to if you're a VC project, VC funded project to end up on Bankless media. But maybe you could just kind of like take a moment to share where people who might think like me, could be right, could be wrong, however, how do you steelman like against what my thought process was that like, oh, here's a media company with the VC branch and any project you hear on their podcast is now, lining their pockets.
I mean, like, I think it's a very expected and obvious conclusion to come to. It's like, oh, the biggest podcast in the crypto industry has a venture arm. Like when people just look at that on a cursory glance, they're like, oh, well, they clearly use their podcast to elevate their projects. It's obvious. Why wouldn't they do that? That's just so obvious. It's clearly what they do. And like, I understand that is it's an easy conclusion to come to. It makes a ton of sense. I think people have done that before. But like, just strictly from incentive, like I've actually made no money from Bankless Ventures because we're 2 years old. And in addition to like me, it's the GPs of Bankless Ventures are me, Ryan, and Ben Lakoff. Ryan and I do not take a salary from Bankless Ventures. That's unique. GPs, like that's usually their job. It's Ben Lakoff is our full-time Bankless Ventures GP. He takes a salary, and then we just take the salary that Ryan and I would have gotten, and we just give it to our analysts, and we can kind of have a bolstered analyst position. Because Ryan and I don't need the money. We get paid already from Bankless Media, and that's that. So my personal incentives, I actually just get more money from Bankless Media than Bankless Ventures because media pays me a salary. And then I'm one of the business owners of media. So like any profits to the company also is split between me and Ryan. And so like strictly speaking, like where do my incentives lie? I get more money from Bankless Media. I get more money from making better content that people want to listen to and that does better. I personally, financially, my incentives do better when Bankless Media, the media entity, does better. If I pivoted the Bankless Media organization to be like a distribution channel for Bankless Ventures, media profits would go down because like people, there's an incentive misalignment between like the early stage companies that we invest in at Bankless Ventures and what Bankless Media is interested. Bankless Media is large enough where if we take some like niche early stage seed investment that we invested in and we elevate them, people are like, why are we listening to this project I've never heard of? Like, I'm not going to click on that episode. I've never heard of it. Don't know how it impacts me. It's not what I came to YouTube to look for. Bankless Media is more like a weather vane. Like, you know, those little things that like spin around depending on which way the wind blows. Like, okay, I wake up every single Monday, every new week. I'm like, all right, what do people want to like hear about? And so like I did an episode with Jim Bianco about like, is Trump trying to destroy the economy? That's what people wanted to hear about. That did well on the YouTube algorithm. That did numbers. That was great. What's not going to do well is talking about this one like niche investment that I made that I hope does well. But if it does do well, it'll do well in like 2 years, not right now. And so there's just like a time difference between the incentives of Bankless Media and Bankless Ventures. Now, every time I take a call with a Bankless Ventures portfolio company or a potential one, we always tell them, it's like if we do decide to invest, we just tell them, hey, this check that we're going to write you does not get you on the podcast. That is not, we just tell them that every single time. We make it very clear that being a Bankless Ventures portfolio company does not get you on the podcast. We tell them what the criteria is for being on the podcast. And I tell them like, yeah, like people want to already know who you are before they click on you. or you need some like really good reason about some like thing that you think is going to be like game changing. And then me and Ryan also agree with that. And so it's once again an optimization function between like, does it intrinsically interest me? Do I think it's good for the world? And is it what people want? And so when any one of our portfolio companies checks any of like those boxes sufficiently, then the game is on. Like, then we can actually like have that discussion and see if they're a good fit for the podcast. But that is also what we do about every single project in crypto. The benefit that Bankless Ventures portfolio companies have is like they have a conduit to me and Ryan. And so we can kind of like coach them into like what media readiness looks like and how to get media ready. But that starts with like a good product that people care about, which is what they need to do in the first place. And so like some people worry that the order of operations, and like totally rightly so, that like we invest in a company and then we put them on the podcast, and then their token goes up, and then maybe later they'll build a product. And like, that's not what we do. Like, the only way to come on the podcast is you have a product that people care about, that now people want to hear from the founders about, and they want to hear their favorite two co-hosts interview the project that they find interesting. And so like I said, it's totally like normal, and even though it's wrong to assume that the relationship between ventures and media is like, oh yeah, media is just a distribution platform for ventures. But also Bankless Ventures is a $39 million fund. It's very small. If the size of media profitability versus ventures like the size of the fund is just too skewed in media's favor. Like, we are a bigger media company than Bankless Ventures is a venture firm. And so the size of that is just not, it would make sense. It's like when Sam Bankman-Fried destroyed his profitable FTX exchange to save his dog shit prop trading firm. Like, why did he do that? That's what if I started to like elevate my portfolio companies from Bankless Ventures on Bankless Media, I would destroy the value of Bankless Media in order to prop up the value of Bankless Ventures. And I don't want to do that. Like, I like podcasting. I hope I podcast for the rest of my life. That is my retirement plan. Like, I'm currently designing a house that I built forever ago in Seattle. I'm building a little podcast room in it. I'm planning on podcasting for the rest of my life. Why would I destroy that business?
Yeah. And for the sake of brevity, because I don't want to run too much over time, I hope I'm coming off fair and objective asking this question. But how do you guys get lines on projects that you choose to invest in? Is it a result of high-profile people coming onto Bankless and then you getting introduced to people? Or is it just the result of being in the Ethereum ecosystem for so long?
Like, how do we get deal flow for Bankless?
Yeah.
Well, we have a very killer investment associate, Brent, who finds deal flow faster than we had ever found them before. The way we started Bankless Ventures was really quick. Was Ryan and I were taking a bunch of angel calls in 2021 and 2022. It ended up taking like 5 meetings a week at some point in time. And I was like, wow, this is taking a lot of our time. I wonder if we could like process this and turn this into a process. Let's hire an analyst who understands angel investing better than we do, so we can become better angel investors. Like, oh, if we're going to hire an analyst that's going to take a salary, why would we pay him with media salary? It's not a media thing. We could like raise money from friends and family, and then we could invest their money too, and we could take a cut, and that could pay for the analyst. I'm like, oh wait, that's what a VC fund is. So we realized that in 2021. We put that idea back on the shelf. We found Ben Lakoff late 2022. We were like, okay, this is the perfect third general partner to lead Bankless Ventures. Let's make Bankless Ventures. At the end of 2022, we raised the fund to go do that. Funneled all of our angel investments that we were naturally getting into Bankless Ventures. Hired Brent, who actually is now just finding deals earlier stages, because as angels, we were not actively finding deals. We were actively making podcasts. Brent goes and actively finds deals. And so Brent's very good at it. But then the real game about like, me and Ryan are not really finding deals as aggressively anymore, because Brent is just really good at it. But what we do is like, we seal the deal. We come into the calls with portfolio companies, we suss them out, we give the thumbs up, thumbs down. And if we give the thumbs up, it's usually into a deal that's pretty competitive. And so we actually have to pitch Bankless Ventures as like, please take our check. And that's where like having media's network, that is the thing that does overlap between media and ventures, is our network. The network is the same. And I have no conflicts of interest leveraging like media's network, because that's really my network, that's Ryan's network, for the benefit of Bankless Ventures. So that is the thing that Bankless Ventures leverages, is media's network. And so we can just connect any portfolio company to who they want to be connected to. And that's why they like us, and that's why they take our money.
Another kind of like opportunity I want to open because I think a lot of lessons were learned from this. The most like recent controversy that Bankless was a part of was the whole AICC token, and it was not limited to Bankless. I think that there was a lot of issues that were probably on the token issuers and the lockup schedule. But maybe this is another instance where there was an overlap between VC and media, and that you did indeed have EJAZ as on the roll-ups before. So people were just like connecting dots that might not have existed. Can you just share what the lessons learned were and ways that we as an industry, we as content creators can really avoid a similar instance like this in the future?
Yeah, so I'll just kind of recap through the events. Ijaz, the co-host, I've known him for years. We first had him on the Bankless podcast when he was the product manager for Coinbase's staking operation in 2021, maybe it was 2022. And then I just have known him personally in addition to that through our time in crypto. We're both in New York. And so I brought him, and Ryan and I found him. I introduced him to Ryan at Permissionless. And then he was just talking Ryan's ear off about like this AI sector that he's super bullish on. And that was October of 2024. So he was like, I think AI agents are huge and I think they're really cool. That was in October. And Ryan felt very comfortable with him. I trust him as an individual. And so when AI agents actually did get very huge, we're like, oh, we know just the guy to bring on to the podcast to do this. And AI agents were a dominant theme. And so we started to make a dedicated AI roll-up episode. In addition to that, Ijaz, he had quit his job from Coinbase like way longer ago, and so he was like unemployed. And it's like, okay, I'm gonna make a fund in the AI crypto space, and that turned into AICC, and he made that in like independently, like he was just doing that on his own time. Like for us, he's a once a week podcast co-host, and then he has time, so he made AICC. He found two other co-founders. And so that was like around the 6th or 7th, like AI weekly roll-up episode. He told me and Ryan, like, hey, I'm making AICC. I'm just like bringing in a bunch of like teams and kind of chads in the space and advisors. If you guys want in, like, it's just like a 5 SOL. And it's like, okay, sure, great. Never talked about it on the podcast. Not one time did we ever talk about it on the podcast. Not one time. I don't think he knew he was going to make AICC when we invited him on to be an AI roll-up host. We didn't even know. And so like we sent him 5 SOL on like a Tuesday, and then the project got like launch over the weekend. And like you said, there was, had we gone back in time, we would have totally said like, hey, like maybe we should put investing on this thing. Ben Lakoff, our GP, did what his job was, which is he went and secured an allocation for Bankless Ventures. And I think this is probably the thing that like I wish AICC had done differently, which is like just be a little bit more intentional about this like whole whitelisting thing, because it turned into like some sort of just like, how do I get in to be in the AICC like whitelist, and how do I get like a 0.5 or 1 SOL allocation? And it just was like you were the right person and you DM'd the right person. There was no method. There's no methodology to it. And then that was a mess. In combination, there was no vesting. And so the tokens were liquid on day one. And like the tokens being liquid on day one, I'm like, I'm a crypto veteran who's also public media. I know I'm not touching those tokens. Ryan knows not to touch those tokens. Like, that's just toxic. You just don't touch those tokens. But it's totally fine because we just trust ourselves. So we're not going to touch these tokens. Ben Lakoff got an allocation for himself personally. He got Bankless Ventures an allocation. He tried to like snipe the supply. He like played funny games by like trying to snipe the supply. He lost that bet. And so he tried to recoup his losses by selling some of his personal allocation. Then he was like, well, that's a bad look if a GP at Bankless Ventures is selling his personal allocation, but not from the fund. And so he went and was like, he sold an equivalent amount from the funds because he's like doing fundraising calls for Bankless LPs. And he's like, well, that's a bad look. So let me go make sure that bad look doesn't exist. And then the Twitter like lights up. It's like Bankless Ventures is selling the tokens day one. And then me and Ryan are like, no, we're not. Like, we're not doing that. Like, why would we do that? And that's not what we would do. And then we learned that like, no, that actually did happen. Look, that is a terrible look. So, and by the way, that was $64,000 worth of tokens that were sold. We go tell Ben, like, that's a terrible look. You can't do that. We have to go rebuy the tokens. And so we rebought the tokens. We ended up with 5% more AICC tokens just because of the price discrepancy at the time. And then that was the mess. The narrative became that Bankless, like, engineered this whole thing. Like, we were the creators of AICC. We were shilling it on the podcast. We dumped millions of dollars on our followers, and like all 3 of those things are false. We were informed about the existence of AICC like 5 days before the token went launched. We never talked about it one time on the podcast. We still have not talked about it on the podcast. I wish that Ben hadn't like done the fun like on-chain shenanigans that he did. But like mistakes are mistakes. He's learned from his mistakes. It's just he doesn't have the same like media incentives that we do, because like he doesn't have 250,000 followers on Twitter, right? He's not on the Bankless media team. He doesn't have those instincts. We have those instincts, and so that was like an unfortunate like set of events that happened. But at the end of the day, it was $64,000 that we sold from Bankless Media, from Bankless Ventures. Bankless Media didn't have an allocation. It was just me and Ryan. And then we just immediately rebought the tokens. But like this scar of the event is like huge. And like the reality of it was like, yeah, we just like sold 64,000 tokens and then rebought $64,000 of tokens really, really quickly. Like, whoops, I'm really sorry. Like, yeah.
Yeah. Thank you for going into that. I know it's probably a pain in the ass to deal with. I myself have actually been arguing with an individual on Twitter who put $6 worth of gas into something a year and a half ago, and he's mad that the project hasn't launched yet. And this is still something that he's willing to like fight tooth and nail for. So, you know, it doesn't matter the sum of money at the end of the day. There's always going to be people that just want to poke and prod. So I think it's like we zoom out, wrap up. Maybe you can just kind of like share a moment of like empathy. What are the difficulties of being so front and center in this space? And like, what are the things that you constantly have to be dealing with and that you are already kind of like getting ahead of? And you just mentioned that you know not to sell tokens because that's just not what you do as a media personality. What, just like from your perspective, what are like, I guess, the trials and tribulations of being a popular name in crypto?
Yeah. I think the big one is like, there are people's interpretations of like me as an individual and as Bankless as an entity that they create their like perception of like me and Bankless from like a back and forth from like Twitter discourse. And Twitter is this like hall of mirrors. And there's a lot of people who like don't listen to the Bankless podcast that have very strong opinions about Bankless. And so like they're coming from a place where like, well, they don't actually like listen. They don't know the words that I'm saying. Or they don't hear what Bankless was putting out. They have an opinion on Bankless from like the tweets that they read or the tweets about Bankless that other people that Mert tweeted out and is like creating some like extremely warped version of reality. Like I said about the AICC thing, like some people were saying that Bankless engineered the whole entire organization in the first place, that we pumped up the like awesomeness of AICC on the podcast before the token launched, and that we dumped tens of millions of followers. This is like the warping that some people like intentionally make about us. And then it's a few loud minority people. And then like a lot of the silent middle like doesn't know what to think because they're low context, right? They don't have as much context. And they have me on one side saying like, that didn't happen. And then they have other people on the other side saying, well, that did happen. And they're like, I don't know what to think. And then they see like, oh, there's a podcast with a VC arm, like clearly where there's smoke, there's fire. And so like, it's feels like it's pushing back against this like insurmountable force of just like, you can, what's that one, like Goddard's law, like you can produce bullshit on the internet faster than anyone can like refute it. And so like, that's what it is. And so at some point it has like lost a little bit of my faith in humanity. And I know that I shouldn't have that because it's just Twitter. And it's like, and crypto, unfortunately, this is something I'm also coming to terms with broadly. It's just like, well, crypto, like the community kind of sucks. Like as a whole, like there's pockets of really cool people and there's some of the best, most brightest people in crypto. And then there's also just like this cesspool of shit that I think crypto, like it's not any one individual's fault, but I think crypto really incentivizes it. It's some combination of just like the economy, like getting a job sucks, the economy sucks. Like, you know, Zoomers and millennials can't afford homes. And so they have to YOLO their bags. And if someone else is making a bag, that reduces the likelihood of their making a bag. And so no one can be supportive of anyone else making any money. And it's very zero sum. And like something about crypto and the combination of crypto and Twitter has really created that. And that's like the environment that I've been living in and like trying to like hold off from like letting that like toxicity invade my soul. And that's hard. That's hard. And especially when I'm like, I've just been, I think I hold myself to a very high ethical standard. I think I have operated as a leader in this industry better than 99% of people. Ryan, like, especially when people like call Ryan a scammer, that goes straight to his heart because Ryan holds himself to the highest standard that I've ever seen someone hold themselves to. And for that reality of like the high standard that he's held himself to not like show up in people's opinions of him really just brings him down. He's like, why am I doing this? Like people actually think I'm a scammer, and I have done literally nothing. I have hopefully shifted the Overton window away from scamming as a result of my time in crypto. That's how he feels. That's how I feel. And so like that gap there between like people think Bankless is a bunch of scammers, and like in fact, like we think that we have held ourselves to the highest of integrities, and we've set an example for what you can do as a media company in crypto. There's a big ass gap there, and that's extremely unfortunate, and it makes me sad. But the Bankless like listener base knows it's a bunch of bullshit, and I appreciate them, and they're in our Discord. And so whenever there's like a bunch of like mobbings on Twitter, I just go into our Discord with our community, and they're like saying like, oh, this is once again the most ridiculous mob attack on Bankless that I've ever seen. I'm really sorry, but like really appreciate the content that you guys put out, and so that's why I do it.
Well, shout out to your community, and I guess I'll end on one final quick question. As a podcaster who respects the kung fu that you and your team have done, what is one piece of advice you can give to a podcast entity that really wants to grow their reach and their audience? A lesson learned that you guys have walked away from your 5 years in the space.
Yeah, you asked about kind of the behind the scene logistics that goes into a podcast, and you talk about like kind of the hardware and the editing and all the back end work. The thing that you didn't mention is prep time. And so we have hour to hour and a half long podcast episodes, and we generally do a kind of a 2-to-1 prep to record time. And so if a podcast is going to be 1 hour, there's generally like 2 hours of prep and studying and research and agenda production. And that used to actually be way higher, and we've just gotten better at it. I used to me and Ryan used to make 3, 4, 5 page long Google Docs of like notes and bullet points of like talking points that we wanted to make through our episodes. And those were some of the earliest episodes of Bankless. It's kind of like how we got a foundation. So a lot of people think that everyone wants to start a podcast, but no one actually wants to. Most people just want to hear themselves talk. What the listeners want is they want you to go prep ahead of time, very deeply, become very informed, and ask the most precise questions possible. And that takes like a ton of prep time behind the scenes.
Awesome. Well, David Hoffman, co-host of Bankless, I hope we got to turn lemon into lemonade. Thank you so much for coming on into the Lion's Den. We started with a little bit of negative back and forth, but I definitely learned a lot from your responses. And yeah, I just appreciate the time you took to come on the Smart Economy podcast. I really appreciate you.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. I feel like this was a Lion's Den at all. I thought you were pretty tame. I think you could have been spicier.
Awesome, man. Well, David, I got to let you go, but yeah, thank you so much. Hope we get to climb in Colorado, and looking forward to running into you at future crypto conferences.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Dylan. I do appreciate being given the opportunity to be on the other side of the mic, and you're a very gracious host. And yeah, I hope the listeners enjoyed it.
Much obliged. Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Smart Economy podcast. To stay in the loop with our latest episodes and insights, head over to www.smarteconomypodcast.com. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for all of our video content. If you enjoyed today's discussion, please consider showing your support by liking, commenting, and reviewing this episode on your favorite podcasting platform. Your feedback helps us reach more listeners and brings even better content your way. We'd also love to hear from you, so please drop a comment on Spotify or YouTube to share what topics you'd like us to cover or who you'd like to see as our next guest. And if you or someone you know would make a great guest, please don't hesitate to reach out. We're always on the hunt for fresh voices and new perspectives. For our NEO token holders out there, please consider voting for NEO News Today as your council representative. We've proudly been serving the NEO ecosystem since 2017, and will continue to do so by putting portions of our council rewards directly back into ecosystem growth initiatives. So, one more time, thank you so much for listening to the Smart Economy podcast, and we look forward to catching you next time.